do want to thank you. Are we on? I do want to thank you for having me here tonight. I will forewarn you that I'm a former county commissioner down in Grace Harbor County, and as a recovering politician with a microphone in my hand, you all know what could happen. So the only thing worse than the recovering politician is those that haven't hit the recovery stage yet. You all talked about Agenda 21 a little bit last month, I assume. How many folks were here for that? So looks like about half. I want to give you a little bit of background. Let me tell you, my life these days is starting to seem a little bit like a country song. I got laid off from my job about 10 days ago at Washington Farm Bureau. They did some dramatic cuts. So after 17 years of working for Washington Farm Bureau, I now put former in front of my title, and it's a painful experience, but it doesn't change that the election is coming. And so the conversation 10 days ago went something like this. The CEO said, "Dan," and I thought he was going to tell me my salary was being reduced, and I was going to be okay with that. And I had asked a coworker of mine to pray for me that I would be gracious as they reduced my salary. Well, they did reduce my salary a little more than what I thought. And the good news is I was able to be gracious. And after he said, you know, we had to lay off 6 people, and unfortunately you're one of them, I said, I'm shocked, I'm heartbroken, my head is spinning, and we have an election in 48 days. So I still need my car, my phone, my office, my computer, the photocopier, etc. And all of a sudden, he was bewildered. And I said, look, we're running out of time to save a nation, and whether I work for Farm Bureau or not, we still have an election, we have commitments to make. So now, instead of somebody who's paid to go around and organize and impact the election, which I've told folks for a long time, if I could, I would do this for free. You really got to be careful with your words, you know. So I stand here as a volunteer with the same message to you that I had 10 days ago when I wasn't a volunteer, and that is we are running out of time. There's 43 days before the final ballots are cast, and this is a very, very critical election. Jenny Beth Martin, how many know who Jenny Beth Martin is? A lot of you don't. Jenny Beth Martin is from north of Atlanta. She is a co-founder and the president of Tea Party Patriots. And she was up in Issaquah with about a half a dozen of us about 3 months ago. And she was relaying that she had been on an airplane with Senator Jeff Sessions, a U.S. Senator from Alabama. And there probably is nobody who's more expert in the budget process in the U.S. Congress than Senator Sessions. And he said that no nation in the history of the world has survived long after hitting 90% debt to GDP. GDP is your gross domestic product. It's what we make as a nation, what we manufacture, what we sell. We're at about 67%, somewhere in that range right now. And he said that we are about 2 to 6 years. Sorry, I got a new phone here just today, and I don't know how to shut it off entirely, so if it buzzes a few more times, I'll toss it across the room. It works with the others. Universal switch. He said we're about 2 to 6 years from hitting the 90% debt to GDP on our current trajectory. That means this election is the last opportunity we have to change course and avoid hitting that 90% threshold that has spelled the end of every other nation that's gone there. Now, I don't know what it means exactly when Senator Sessions says a nation has not survived long after hitting 90% debt to GDP. Whether nobody has turned around from that point. Are we so naive and so arrogant as a nation to believe that we'll be the first to do that? We are going to become like Greece if we don't make changes. Now, I'm a pretty conservative guy, and I have a lot of friends, and I have my own beliefs on social issues when it comes to family issues and abortion and all of that stuff. But I will tell you, none of that matters in this election. And the reason is, if we don't change course and save this nation from economic peril, there will be no social issues left to argue over, because everything will fall apart around us. And so elections and majorities are about coalitions. So I have folks that I'm working with in a coalition who have a lot of viewpoints that are very dissimilar to mine. But they recognize that we're in peril economically and something has to be done. And I'll tell you that there's hope. And I'll give you my father as an example. 4 years ago, my father was a retired state employee, and my stepmom were not registered to vote. They're snowbirds. They go down to Lake Havasu in the winter because it gets around 70 degrees down there in the winter time. And then they come back up here when the weather's tolerable in Grace Harbor County for about 3 weeks out of the year. About 2.5 weeks they complain about that weather before they go back down to Havasu. So they said that 4 years ago that they thought Barack Obama was going to change the politics of America, that he was a breath of fresh air, that he was above the partisanship, and that he was going to get in there with a new perspective and do things right. And a lot of folks felt that way. Then a couple of years ago, they registered to vote. And they started referring to him as this Obama fellow. And then they said, well, we've registered to vote because we're going to vote for anybody else, because he's not what we thought he would be. And then they said, and Glenn Beck is the only person on TV that makes any sense anymore. And I'm like, who are you and what have you done with my parents? And also my other thought was it's very heartwarming to see them mature. When they grow up. And you think, well, this is a good thing. And then my dad's 75. And he told me, he said his generation had it pretty good. You know, he was born in 1937, so he was 8 years old at the end of World War II. And you know, he was spared the memories from the Great Depression, and he was in the boom times. And he was, worked for the state, and the state was very generous in the retirement plans. If you know anything about those plans, he was a PERS 1 retiree. He's been retired longer than he worked for the state, and making more money in retirement than he made with his base salary working for the state. And there are a lot of folks like that, and that's part of the reason our state's in the situation they're in. But he said the generation before him, my grandfather, that came through the Depression, and he said the generation after him, that's me, have pretty tough times, but they had good times. And he said he's very concerned of what's going to be left for his kids and his grandkids. And so, and there are a lot of folks that are thinking about that. One of the guys in our coalition, on our coalition board, is 78 years old. He's a retired Boeing executive. He's got it made. He doesn't have to worry about anything. Like my father, he came through those good times. He could walk away and say, I'm okay. I've got enough for my kids and grandkids. Everyone else worry about yourselves. But that's not his attitude. He believes that this nation is worth saving. And so he's working real hard to do that. See, I told you things were falling apart in the state.
It's Obama tape, I'm sorry.
It's coming from the left. So, I want to give you a little bit more of my background. Besides having been at the Farm Bureau, I was involved in party politics for about 15 years. I got the opportunity to go to Wisconsin with Woody Herzog. I think a lot of you know Woody. He's state coordinator for Tea Party Patriots. We went and did some voter education back there, and the Tea Party Patriots did a fabulous job back in Wisconsin. And I was sitting at the table, and I don't know what state this lady was from. It was either Alabama or Mississippi. That's, you know, because she kept saying y'all, and y'all, and all y'all. You know, that's plural for y'all. So she said to me, so when is y'all's convention? And I knew what she was talking about, but I wanted to mess with her mind a little bit. And I said, what convention? She said, y'all's state convention. Except for she drew the syllables out, convention. And I said, what state convention? Y'all's Republican convention. And I said, ma'am, I have never been a Republican. And it got real quiet around our table. But what I have found in meeting Tea Party folks around the state is a lot of y'all have never been Republicans either. And a lot of y'all have never been Democrats. And some of you have been one or the other, and very few both. And a lot of you want nothing to do with any organized political party. What you want is results. So to complete messing with her mind, and I said, ma'am, I spent 15 years in the Democratic Party. And it got real quiet like y'all are. Yes, I said Democrat. I was president of the State Young Democrats in Washington. I was on the State Democratic Central Committee. I was chair of the Grace Harbor Democratic Party. I did everything but state committee woman. They wouldn't let me. And I didn't push real hard. I just want to test the boundaries of equal opportunity. And I was the Democratic County Commissioner. So my background, you know, so when she said, when is y'all's convention, I knew it was going to be a fun conversation. I haven't been involved in the Democratic Party for 10 years, and I've never been a Republican. Now, mind you, I was a lot more conservative than a lot of my cohorts in the Democratic Party. And there are some very good Democrats in office. Brad Owen, our Lieutenant Governor, is someone I hold in the utmost regard. I have worked with him for 20-some years. There are some members of the legislature in the Democratic Party that are absolutely rock solid on property rights and family values and other things that I hold dear. And there are folks in the Republican Party who are as rock solid as some of those Democrats I mentioned. And there are people in both parties who really shouldn't be in office. And I think that in order to save a nation and in order to save the state, we need to sort through the candidates and say, what do you stand for? And not just look at the letter that follows their name on the ballot. Because what someone stands for is what they're going to do in office. And we need to be picky about who we're giving the gift of power. And we need to find folks who are going to let it go when the time comes to let it go. Not spend, how many years has it been? 38 years for Norm Dix? You know, Norm held on a little bit too long. And he just recently decided to retire, and out of deference to Norm, every time I say I'm sure it had nothing to do with the ethics investigation. Because I'm sure there were other reasons. So when we went back to Wisconsin, Woody and I were on a mission not only to help out in the voter education effort, but to secure resources for a similar effort in Washington State. And I can tell you that the Tea Party Patriots and Americans for Prosperity and others that went and educated voters in Wisconsin allowed those voters to make informed decisions. And when they make informed decisions, they make better decisions. Because I have to believe that a lot of the folks that hold office in our state legislature, and I've been around that process since mid-80s, 1986, however many years that is. I have seen a lot of people in both parties in the House and Senate who are there for no other reason than voters made ignorant choices. I don't know if they They have nice looking signs. If I don't know how some of them got elected. And some of them governed very poorly regardless of which party they were in. And I've seen the Republicans in the majority and the Democrats in the majority spend money that they ought not be spending, tolerate laws that they should not tolerate, and adopt laws that they should never even made eye contact with. And so both parties have a high capacity of screwing things up. And the last time the Republicans took the majority at the federal level, in 1994, when they had that Republican revolution, it was ugly what we saw afterwards. The Republicans started spending money like drunken Democrats. And after a few elections, the Democrats came back and they outdid the Republicans. And we have been in a very big mess ever since. So we're out in our coalition, the Private Enterprise Project, looking for conservatives who are going to stop spending so much of other people's money, who are going to rebuild an economy, who are going to pull back on the excessive regulations, who are going to respect our property rights, and who are going to go back to our foundational principles of limited government. Because that's what made this nation prosperous. And that's what allows us the freedom we have. You cannot have freedom without reverence for private property. You can search the world over and you can't find it. And we are losing that core principle. And you cannot spend your way out of a spending problem. And yet we have people in both parties who are trying to do that. And so if you find a Republican out there who is speaking the same language that a Democrat is, and a Democrat speaking the same language that a Republican is, saying, well, we're going to spend this and name that and preserve that, you need to give second thought to whether that person deserves you filling in that little circle next to their name on the ballot. So here's what we have found. About 2/3 of the legislative districts in the state, we're still holding together. That's good. About 2/3 of the districts vote against the state income tax. They vote to repeal a tax on food and beverage. They vote to limit tax increases. Iman's initiative gets support every year, every time it's there from these voters, in about 2/3 of the districts consistently. And then a lot of them will turn around and elect someone like Tammy Green or Marcy Maxwell, who are absolutely the opposite of all of those ballot measures where the voters have expressed themselves. So there's a gap, and this is where the education opportunity takes place. We are going to be going door to door to frequently voting independents and unidentified candidates or voters. So people who are likely to vote in this election but haven't really made up their mind. They're not conservative, they're not liberal, they're not Democrat, they're not Republican. Those folks largely have made up their mind. But about 2/3 of the voters or more are independents and unidentified. And we want to tell them what the incumbent office holders have done, Democrat and Republican. And we want to tell them the views of the candidates, Democrat and Republican. And if the candidates have refused to answer, we're going to say that. And we also will put out contact information. So if they want to contact those candidates and ask them, why did you vote that way? Why didn't you answer the survey? What's your position? They can do that. And we will also tell them the platform position on those fiscal issues. So whatever party the candidate is affiliated with. And so most of that is going to take place here in the Puget Sound Trough. There are 40th is really not an area of focus up here at Whatcom and Skagit anymore. But there are 15 districts right here where there will either be fiscal conservative or fiscal liberal control of the legislature and the House and Senate. One down here in the 17th in the Vancouver area, one over here in Spokane in the 6th district. But 13 districts right there in the Puget Sound Trough. There will be people coming coming from out of state, just like they did in Wisconsin. And when we went door to door and educated voters in Wisconsin, the fiscal conservative candidates did better in the recall election than they did in the original election, whether that was Governor Walker or Lieutenant Governor Clayfish or the legislative candidates. And the key was going door to door and asking questions. And so the conversation will go something like this. Hi, my name's Dan, or even if you don't want to say your name, I'm a volunteer with Voter Voice. We are doing a 6-question, 90-second survey. Now, Woody, how many know Woody? You know, Woody's a pretty nice guy. And so he would say, hi, my name's Woody, I'm a volunteer. I wanted to know if you would answer a few questions. I'm not afflicted that way, am I, Bob? No. I was a little more direct. I said, we're doing a 6-question survey. If the election were today, who would you vote for president? I mean, if I'm going to ask them if they're going to answer a question, now I've got 7 questions. And they might say no on the first one. So I don't want them to answer the first question of, will you take a survey? So if the election were today, who would you vote for president? President Obama or Governor Romney? Who would you vote for governor? Congressman Inslee or Attorney General McKenna? Do you favor or oppose the state income tax? Now we want to ask you about 3 ballot measures. We're going to ask them about the tax limit, we're going to ask them about charter schools, and we're going to ask them about the referendum on marriage. Now, that last one's a little controversial, but I want to know if these people are conservative or liberal. And we're not engaged as a coalition in that last ballot measure, but it's a good way to find out where folks stand. And generally, if someone's conservative on that, they're going to be a fiscal conservative. Not always true, but for the most part. We're trying to identify people who want limited taxing and spending. And that non-tax, non-spending issue is a way to do it, as bizarre as that sounds. Now, we will leave behind a piece that I mentioned to you earlier that has and I've got examples, if anyone wants one, I've got examples from District 23 and 26 up here, and we will have large quantities of these for doorbellers. They are coming within a couple days from the print shop. So we will leave behind that piece. If no one answers the door, we're going to leave one behind. If we talk to the voter, we'll leave that education piece. And the goal is to know who supports tax limits, who is opposed to an income tax, and let them know where the candidates stand on those fiscal issues, and then go back to that person and make sure they vote. We are not going to say, vote for Marcy Maxwell or vote for Tim Eaves in the 41st District over in Mercer Island. We're not out to advocate for a particular candidate. We are out to make sure that the voters know where the candidates stand. And we believe if they are informed, they're going to make a good choice. And that the paramount issue in this election, at the legislative level, at the governor, the Congress, and the presidential level is, are you going to turn around from the fiscal cliff that we're all heading towards? Because the problem isn't just that we've got $16 trillion in debt as a nation and no idea how to pay it off. The problem as a state, where we are required to have a balanced budget by Constitution, by state constitution, we're required to have a balanced budget. You know how you balance the state budget? You pretend that about $8 billion in retirement obligations don't exist, in debt obligations. They have taken those off from the budget. They have terms like general fund and near general fund and special fund, and I saw this happening in county government as well. Money is money. And no matter what fund you put it in and what label you put on it, if we owe money because we built a highway, or we owe money because somebody retired from the state, or we owe money because the Constitution requires us to fund K-12 education, then we owe money, period. And we've got to face up to the reality. You know, my dad is old enough where he doesn't have to worry about the pension funds, whether they're going to be there long enough for him. But I was talking
funded. And I got 3 shocked what responses out of him when he realized how many billions of dollars weren't funded. It's really an ugly game that they've been playing in the legislature. And the Democrats and the Republicans have done it together. And we need to have people in both parties who are honest enough with themselves, with our retirees, with our K-12 system, to say there have been lies that have put these budgets together for decades, and we need to come to the point of truth, and we need to come to the point of reality. Because when the wheels come off the bus, everything is going to crash at the same time. I have been chair or vice chair of the board of a nonprofit social service agency for 10 of the last 12 years. And I have told my cohorts in the social service agency, and let me tell you folks, there will always be folks amongst us who need support. There are some people truly who cannot work. They're seniors, elderly, and disabled that really need services. There are a lot of folks who receive services that ought not be on it. But the reality is there are people that society has to take care of. And I believe the churches ought to be doing a lot more, but I'm not willing to leave folks in the gap if the churches aren't stepping up and doing it. And maybe that's the philosophy that led me to the Democratic Party years ago, and it's still with me a little bit. But I can tell you what, more and more folks in the social service arena are realizing that fiscal conservatives are their friends. Yes. Because they're facing reality. And like I said, when the bus crashes, everything crashes with it. And whether you think it's the schools, which it ought to be because that's constitutionally mandated, and hopefully as conservatives we believe in the Constitution. But the schools, the highways, the police and the fire, the social services, whatever is most important to you in government is at risk when we have Democrats and Republicans alike who will not face reality and will not be honest with the folks that put them in office to lead and serve. So I don't care which party they're in. I told some Republicans I'm going to help you get elected to office, and if you don't do well, I'll turn against you in less than 2 years. You've got a year, maybe a year and a half, in order to prove me that you were the right person. And if you haven't proved that, I'm coming after you. Because you got to rotate these folks around. And folks, we've been waiting too long on the rotation for some of them. And so what was the name of the movie where the people screamed out the window, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore"?
Commercial. Network.
There you go. I mean, I wish we would need to play that video for folks. I mean, I am optimistic. This is a very serious election, but I do think there's opportunity to turn this thing around. So here's what we need you to do. We have folks coming out of state, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and Tennessee for sure, that are going to come help us because they believe it's important in Washington state to get fiscal conservatives elected like we saw in Wisconsin and other places. So I hope that y'all will feel just a little bit bad if they come here and work hard and you're not working hard beside them. So we are going to hit this thing exceptionally hard the 2nd and 3rd week of October. 4th week of October we'll do matchbacks and go after independents and unidentifieds who haven't turned in their ballots. So I didn't bring a sign-up sheet with me, but I believe all of you are on an email list. So here's what you're going to be asked to do. I need people to doorbell. How many people are willing to go doorbell? Okay, you heard me give that 6-question survey. How many people think they can do that? Okay? All right, that's about half of who should have raised their hands, but thank you. We need folks, if you're too timid to doorbell and I can't push you out there when you show up, then we need some drivers because we're going to have to drive people around the precincts. Rather than paying for motel rooms for folks, whether they come from Georgia or Okanagan County or Yakima, and we'll have folks from in-state come as well. It'd be nice if we had a bunch of spare bedrooms we could put folks in. And I tell you, most of these folks are going to have a southern accent, so you'll have a good time. You can't help but smile when you're around the southerners, and they throw y'all in there so many times. So how many folks think they could house folks for a few nights?
Absolutely.
Okay. How many people like putting on picnics? We got to feed these folks. Okay, now I see some of you are going to be driving, doorbelling, doing picnics, and housing folks. So you're going to have to make some choices, but I appreciate the hands. So those are the opportunities. Oh, and phone calls. How many people didn't raise their hand for anything else? Too many people know the tricks on the questions. So we will be able to have folks dial from anywhere in the lower 48 states and ask those same 6 questions. So there are areas where we can't get through in doorbell very easily, but we can dial them up, and you don't even have to remember the phone number, because you'll be able to dial up, and you dial into the database. Your script will be right there. When you hit star, it's going to dial the voter household for you. You'll ask them the 6 questions, jot the answers down on a piece of paper, hit star, it'll take you into the database. You'll fill it out, and you hit star, and it'll dial the next number. And then it just repeats itself. So back in 1992, I participated in the Dump Johnts campaign. Anybody remember Jim Johnts from Indiana? He chaired the committee that Doc Hastings from Central Washington chairs. And the big issue nationally was the Endangered Species Act and the spotted owls.
Of course.
I lived in Hoquiam at the time. We lost a lot of timber jobs, and our schools suffered, and our social services suffered, and et cetera, et cetera. So I had a list of voters, about 100 voters, and about 50,000 names were spread out across the nation. And I said, this is Dan Wood, I live in Hoquiam, and I want to tell you what your congressman has done to my schools and my community and my family's jobs. And in 1992, when Bill Clinton and the Democrats swept the nation and took everything in sight, Jim Johnts, the Democratic congressman from Indiana, who chaired the Natural Resource Committee, was voted out of office. Not because of money, but because of the power of grassroots action, and because of the passion of the people behind it. And those people were passionate all across the nation because they had something at stake and they knew it. You all have something at stake in this election, and you all know you have something at stake. So when that volunteer opportunity comes around, please get out there and help us dump the folks like we did in 1992.